Today I'm going to talk about a chivalrous virtue which actually paves the way between beta male masculinity and alpha male masculinity that is instructive for us, and I anecdotally derive from what a very kind man did for me once. In 2014, I experienced one of the absolute darkest years of my life. Girlfriend broke up with me, dad died, all of the social tragedy, everything. Just I'm like, God, where are you? Right? No idea. Still don't really know. But like an idiot, I processed some of that darkness over Twitter. And Twitter was still fairly new to me at the time. It was only 2 or 3 years old, so I didn't really realized how emotionally stupid it was of me to try to process these things over Twitter. Of course, that was the heyday of that platform. And that took the form of publicly distancing myself from a ministry that I had partnered with for a very long time, Desiring God. That's how I originally built a lot of my audience, was on desiringgod.org as a writer for them. And increasingly, as I wrote for them, the editorial staff there, who is an amazing staff, and myself, we just saw things differently more and more and more over time. And because of that, simultaneously going on with a lot of tragic things that I had to face in life, I processed that over Twitter, and that caused a very negative reaction from many evangelicals who were following me, many evangelicals who were fans of Desiring God. And in response, a bunch of these, Reformed Baptist-y type evangelical TGC orbit, ERLC orbit women, the female bloggers, responded to what I said. And some of the things they were saying were true for them, I suppose, but that's one of the problems with Twitter. I didn't really have the emotional self-awareness to realize that it was a terrible, terrible platform for any serious discussion, most of all emotional issues. And one woman in particular accused me of causing harm and being responsible for harming certain individuals in the church. Or not certain individuals. I was just abstractly causing harm, I think, was the accusation. Because of the way I was publicly processing these things, I was questioning my faith. I was questioning the legitimacy of the church. I was questioning a lot of these things out loud, and that was prohibited socially by these active female social media oriented evangelical blogging types. And I didn't really have the emotional self-awareness to realize that I was responsible for putting my stuff on there, and how terrible of a platform it really was for that. That was a very bad season for me, and I didn't really know how to handle myself during that season. So at the same time, there was one man whom I simultaneously revered and had grown resentful toward, and he represented everything I wished I could have been. And for that reason, I was very jealous of his prestige and position within evangelicalism, and I felt entitled to his attention. I felt entitled to his praise, and I was narcissistic in that way. And it ended up that one day during my dark night of the soul on Twitter, that this man, he liked this woman's tweet that was accusing me of harming people, and I was furious. So I unfollowed him, F that guy. In my head, I was like, man, I'm so done with this guy, this world, that chick, all these, I was just done. I was done. 2014, 2015, thereabouts, right? I was on the edge of not only just leaving the Christian writing world, I was on the edge of abandoning my faith. And there were days where I felt like I just hadn't told anybody. And so I unfollowed this guy, and I think he sensed, because we kind of were in the same world, I think he kind of sensed my distance. And he even saw that he unfollowed me, because I think as soon as I unfollowed him, he emailed me. And we occasionally emailed, but not a ton of personal, interaction. And he emailed me, and I was ready for a fight. I was ready for something brash. But instead, he apologized. What he was doing, he was trying to take responsibility for the situation. He reached out to me and he said, "Hey, Paul, listen, man, if there's anything I've done to offend you, I'm really sorry. You're a very gifted man, and I would love to talk on the phone sometime. If you have any free time, I would love to talk on the phone." And even at that time, that was so the opposite of how I had experienced Christian men in positions of authority. Everybody before that was, we're not giving you our time. We're not talking on the phone. When is our meeting over? Very sort of lacking any kind of care or tact. And this stood in stark contrast to that. So he said, Paul, you're very gifted. Would love to talk on the phone sometime. So I said, yeah, sure, okay, fine. Let's talk on the phone. Maybe he wants to fight on the phone. So he called me and he said, Paul, I am not calling to judge you. I'm not here to rebuke you. I'm not here to fight. I just want you to know that I really do care about you and I'm here for you. And he stayed on the phone with me for like 3 hours asking questions and joking with me and sympathizing with me and being like, yeah, it's so funny how evangelicals act sometimes. And we talked about theology and we talked about our personal experiences. And like 2 hours into the conversation, I was like, what is this? Why is he on the phone with me? It's been 2 hours. And he said, when you move to Chicago, I'd love to take you out to breakfast. So a couple months later, that was when I was moving from Philly to Chicago. I moved to Chicago, and that weekend, he bought me breakfast. He went out of his way to make time for me. He reached out to me. I don't know if I'd ever experienced anything like this from another man before in terms of the initiative and the care and the desire for relational connection, to build a friendship. And I was still waiting to fight. And every time I went out to Wheaton since then, we grew in our friendship. And now every time I go out there, he buys me breakfast. Every time. And he says the same thing. Paul, you're one of the most gifted young men I know. I'm excited for your future. This man's active belief in me, this man who's a little bit further down the road, his active faith in me to say, hey, Paul, I want to know you. I want you to know that I care about you, is one of the reasons I'm alive today. It's one of the biggest reasons I'm still a Christian today, is because this Christian man whom I had resented because I had this sense of entitlement from him and victimhood toward him. And he had never done anything to me. He just represented everything I wanted and hated at the same time. And this man laid down his ego and reached out to me when, as far as I knew, or as far as he knew, I would just lash out at him. But he listened. He said, hey, let's talk. And he listened and he believed in me. And when I lost my faith in God, he didn't lose his faith in me. So, flash forward 3 years, 4 years, we're here today. And I was just struck by how much this man's initiative toward me has sustained my faith because of this relational connection. So I reached out to him to ask what advice he would give to young men who were in my position then. And his answer was very profound. And the more that I thought about it, I began to research it. And the more that I researched it, the more profound I found this advice to be. In fact, in all of my writing on masculinity, if there's anything missing in my formulation of masculinity, in terms of the masculine ideal, it's probably missing this emphasis. And this man, his name is Justin Taylor, whom many know as the executive vice president of book publishing at Crossway, but he's also well known for his blog Between Two Worlds at the Gospel Coalition. And I asked him to give my Self-Wire listeners advice because Justin, I don't know, I might be presuming to call him a mentor, but I see him as one of the men that has initiated a relationship in my life and whom I want to emulate. And so I said, hey, would you give my Self-Wire listeners advice, specifically advice for young men who find themselves in a very dark place, like the kind of place I was in when you reached out to me? Like, talk to me then, but do it to all of my Self-Wire people. And he said, okay. And here's what he said, which I absolutely love. Justin said to me, quote, consciously cultivate the Christian virtue of kindness. Consciously cultivate the Christian virtue of kindness. Every word counts in that counsel. Consciously. Few meaningful changes happen in life without an intentional plan and a deliberate choice. It doesn't matter your background or your personality or your limitations or your preferences. You can choose to be kind today. Cultivate. That's an agrarian metaphor. Our hearts, like soil, are rocky and need tilling and preparation and work in order for fruit to grow and for weeds to be killed. Christian virtue of kindness. Christian kindness and worldly kindness can look similar on the surface, but Christian kindness has godly motives, standards, and goals. As you struggle in your early years to find your place in this world as a man, you will be told that kindness is a form of weakness. But that is only true of worldly kindness, which is a poor imitation of the real thing. Biblical kindness is not lazy and passive and mealy-mouthed and soft. Robust biblical kindness is at the heart of the meaning of the universe. Those who are in Christ have received the richest and fullest display of kindness ever seen through the gift of Jesus Christ, Romans 2:4, Ephesians 2:7, Titus 3:4. God is kind to those who continue in his kindness, Romans 11:22. And his kindness is meant to lead us to repentance, Romans 2:4. Love is kind, 1 Corinthians 13:4. We are to commend ourselves by our kindness, 2 Corinthians 6:4 and 6. Kindness is a fruit of the Spirit, Galatians 5:22. We are commanded to be kind to one another and to put it on daily, Ephesians 4:32, 2 Timothy 2:24, Colossians 3:12. I think you'll discover the consciously cultivating of the Christian virtue of kindness will draw you outside yourself, will encourage others, and will honor our good and kind Lord. End quote. You can tell Justin is an editor. It is a very packed definition and explanation. And I'm not going to comment at length on Justin's quote or his advice, because I think it's very profound and good advice, but it's very thick explanation and it's a very deep claim. And this statement is very packed with potential for application and tacticity, and so I'm going to comment on it. So my commentary is really a credit to the profundity and density of Justin's statement. And my applications are thus. Number one, alpha males can be just as bad as beta males, which is why kindness is the ultimate form of masculine responsibility. So the opposite of a beta male isn't an alpha male. Both of those categories are categories of weakness. The opposite of a beta male is the same as the opposite of an alpha male, which is simply a real man, or the man who fulfills the masculine ideal. What is the masculine ideal? If a beta male is overly passive and an alpha male is overly aggressive, what is a real man? A real man doesn't let his most masculine qualities run unchecked and become hyperboles and parodies of a man. In terms of Aristotle's conception of virtue, a good man is a balanced man. A good man is a balanced man. Men who aren't assertive often fail to be fully men, but men who are discourteously aggressive and emotionally retarded often have no control over themselves. They're just as childish as the sheepish passive men. Kindness is closest to what Thomas Aquinas calls humanitas. Without humanitas, a man was an unenlightened brute. Okay, the opposite of humanitas, the opposite of kindness, in terms of the 7 virtues. The opposite of kindness, what was the vice which opposed kindness? It was invidia, which we call envy. But a more straightforward Latin translation of invidia is not envy per se, but non-sight. Non-sight. Dante depicted in hell that those guilty of invidia were wandering around with lead cloaks, and their eyes were soon shut with leaden wire. And what they were blind to was what they already had been given by God and by family. So why is kindness the opposite of invidia? Because it represents the refusal to be a victim, to be blind to the good that one has. Kindness is the ultimate common relational mode of taking responsibility for another person. Kindness is not just being caring, but taking responsibility for someone, even someone who hates you. This is the ultimate version of responsibility. This is kindness. This is the hardest aspect of what Jocko Willink calls extreme ownership. That's why kindness is manly. Not because Christians should be people-pleasing doormats, but because they recognize that the people to whom you most need to be kind are often those to whom it is most difficult to be kind. That's why kindness is the opposite of niceness, not the same. Niceness is passive conformity to one's social circumstances. Kindness is the most radical form of common relational personal responsibility for the other. Kindness is the proactive, directional concept that we ought to place upon our masculine energy and channel it. Kindness is the fitting end of aggression. Kindness makes the expression of moral grievances more eloquent. Jordan Peterson said, "It's better to be a restrained monster than a well-behaved coward." But by the same token, it's bad to be an unrestrained monster. And kindness is one of the restraints that helps men who wield the power of internal chaos toward a worthwhile creative act, an act of responsibility. And kindness is really the lost masculine virtue. In the original chivalric code held by medieval knights, there were many masculine virtues. There is a 19th century French historian named Léon Gautier, and he explains that there are 10 rules of the chivalric code of medieval knights. And they are codes such as believe the church doctrines, defend the church, defend the helpless, all very masculine things. Love your home country. Don't be a coward. Make war on the infidel without mercy. Be a hard worker. Never lie. Champion good against evil. And be kind. So that's the first application I want to make, that alpha males can be just as bad as beta males because kindness is the ultimate version of responsibility, is radical ownership for the other. 2, kindness is verbal judo. In 1993, George Thompson, who was a police officer, the late George Thompson was a police officer who also had a PhD in English. And he wrote the timeless book, Verbal Judo, in which he explains the communicative principles that helped him to emotionally de-escalate situations. So the metaphor of judo communicates that unlike a striking martial art, right, that judo instead utilizes your opponent's momentum against them rather than countering their blow with your own blow. I had a professor once who he was sort of an offensive professor, and a lot of students, so he had like a small cluster of students that loved him, but most students were like aggressive and didn't like him, right? So he used this tactic with hostile students. So angry students would often approach him after class to disagree with him and be like, "Hey, you argued this wrong. I disagree with you. You're totally wrong here." And he would just walk up to them, nodding, with his eyebrows raised, communicating with his body language, complete agreement and receptivity, right? And he would say, absolutely, brother. I'm so thankful you're in the class. We should absolutely get coffee sometime, right? And most of the time, students would calm down very quickly and be like, yeah, okay, sure, let's get coffee, And most of those students would turn into his fanboys because kindness was verbal judo. He used their aggression and pulled them in and said, yeah, totally, let's talk about it. We're friends, right? He subverted aggression with friendship through kindness. That's kindness. It's a basic psychological principle. He explained it to me one time, and he said, Paul, in these conversations, you should always be looking for something for which you can apologize in a conflict. Always be looking for something for which you can apologize. Not like a fake apology, but genuinely try to take ownership of something. Why? Because you want to try to be a doormat? No. He says, even if everything you said was correct, just try to say, well, I should have said it better, or I should have had a better tone, right? Try to take responsibility for something and double down on it. Don't use it as an excuse. Double down on it. Say, you know what? I should have done this better. And I'm sorry. Why? It's a way to express kindness, which covers a multitude of sins. Okay? That's verbal judo. Kindness is verbal judo. It's God's version of verbal judo. Paul even says in Romans 2:4, the kindness of God leads you to repentance. Kindness is verbal judo. Number 3, kindness separates you from virtue signalers. The best part about kindness is that you can't use it to posture over your opponent. The moment you use kindness as a tool to humiliate your opponent in a conversation, you become unkind and you lose your tactical advantage. So people will virtue signal about every single kind of virtue, how loving they are, how humble they are, how disciplined they are, how patient they are, how much they love justice. But you're never going to have a guy yelling at you about how kind he is. It's impossible to virtue signal kindness. The only way to virtue signal kindness is to be genuinely kind, in which case it's not virtue signaling, it's just virtue, right? Kindness separates you from virtue signaling, and people can see virtue signaling a mile away. They see right through it. I care so much about justice. You're racist, sexist, bigot, homophobe. You're wrong. I'm right because you're evil and I'm good. People see through that. People see that that's not a conversation. People see that that is benefiting you. That people see that that's you serving you. But to be genuinely kind, even to be publicly kind, to put on a display of kindness, is itself a kindness. And it's impossible to fabricate because it exists in the act. So, cultivating a kind disposition is tactically advantageous in 3 ways. It puts other people at ease. It proactively de-escalates conflict, and it keeps your ego from taking control of your behavior to make you blind, to shut your eyelids with leaden thread. And again, it's helpful for us to conceive of kindness as a virtue, right? A virtue is different from an obligation. An obligation is an abstract category that dictates how you should behave. A virtue is a manner of right behavior that is dictated not by abstract logic, but because it is fitting with who you are as a human being and it cultivates flourishing. If you are the sort of man who is strenuously seeking to attain masculine qualities for himself, you should be kind. Why? Because you should be nice? No, you shouldn't be nice. Be kind because it's a way of taking responsibility. Why will taking responsibility as manifested as kindness make you better? Because it's a form of relational exertion and ethical strain that will make you smart. It will require you to be sharp. It will require you to be better and smarter and sharper. It will make you a man, and you need some sort of restraint on the monster inside. And it is a distinctively Christian conception of that restraint, which proposes kindness per se. Okay? It is used by the most manly Christians in the history of the church, and it's effective relationally, it's orthodox theologically, and it's historical traditionally, and it is very neglected, especially by me. I need to do much better at this. I'm terrible at kindness. That's why Justin's email was so convicting. Otherwise, I'm just a monster. Without kindness, as a man, I'm just a monster. Thankfully, Justin reached out to me when a nice person would have avoided me. Justin reached out to me when a domineering jerk alpha male would have just written me off. Justin reached out to me when a passive-aggressive person would have told me, "Oh, yeah, man, everything's cool, you're good, man," while he gossiped about me behind my back. Justin was kind. Justin was a man. And in doing so, he emulated a reality that I can now try to imitate in that same virtue.